And joining us now on the line from Cambridge, Massachusetts, Esther Duflo and Abhijit Banerjee, authors of Poor Economics, which just won the 2011 Financial Times Goldman Sachs Business Book of the Year award. And I guess we should start by saying congratulations to both of you and welcome to our program.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I would just like to start very generally. You know, we've actually on this program and obviously on many others. Esther, to you first. You know, Jeffrey Sachs has a book out on this. There's the famous book by the British author, The Bottom Billion. Many people are tackling this issue these days. And I'd like to know, first off, what do you feel is missing from this debate so far?
I think what was missing is willingness to go a little more into the details of things. A lot of these books have interesting answers, but they are very one-sided. And what we thought was important was to go deeper into the motivation of the poor people and their real life on the ground to understand better what could help them.
Abhijit, would you follow up on that? What's been missing in the debate so far?
Well, you know, the way the debate works is that I have I write a book, I have a recipe for solving the problems of all the poor people everywhere. And we sort of come to the point where we think that it's much more important to think of every problem, the poor people not having one problem but 300 problems. I mean, you know, each problem is kind of a separate one. You have to think about it. It's the problem of primary education is not the problem of secondary education. It's not one education problem, one poverty problem. It's a bunch of separate problems, and unless you think about what's stopping people from getting the right kind of primary education, you won't get the right answer. It's not a matter of just thinking about, you know, it's either resources or governance or incentives or some magic bullet of that kind.
So let's get Esther a little bit more specific here then. Much of the debate in the world around how to do development centers on two groups that you refer to in your book as the supply wallahs and the demand wallahs. Explain the difference.
So the supply wallahs think that it is possible and mainly maybe the only way to improve the situation of the poor by giving them more things. So for example, if you want to fix education, you have to build a lot of schools and then people will come. The demand wallahs are taking the exact opposite position, which is they say, no. If people really wanted schools, they would have found a way and managed to build those schools themselves. So everything must come from the demand. And for example, in education, the only way to improve education outcome is to give people incentives to get educated, for example, by improving the labor market. So the best education policy in the world of the demand wallah is no education policy.
So has our approach, Abhijit, been just completely 180 degrees wrong on all of these issues?
No, not at all. I mean, I think that there is certainly value to the view that you need to provide school buildings if you want to have schools. I think there's strong evidence that when you build schools, that does something. There's also evidence for the view that if people are not convinced that education is valuable, then even if you build schools, they don't get a lot out of it. I think what's missing is more that even if you have the schools and people are willing to go there, whether that's a guarantee of education. And that's what we're seeing in the world right now. There's a huge increase in the number of people who actually go to school. Remarkable over the last 15, 20 years. And what we are seeing with that is extremely poor performance on the test scores and all kinds of measures of knowledge. And I think that's reflecting exactly this problem that, you know, it's not enough for people to want to go to school. It's not enough for there to be a school and a teacher. There needs to be other details that you have to get right.
So in other words, if I can add something to that.
Please.
We have been supplying the wrong things, and people are also demanding the wrong things. And so there is a perfect congruence of supply and demand to provide an education system which at the end of the day doesn't deliver. And what we are trying to explain, for example, in the chapter of education in our book, is how to fix that.
Well, that's interesting, Esther. Let me follow up on that, because it's one thing for us to supply the wrong things, but you've also said they demand the wrong things. How can they demand the wrong things? What does that mean?
Well, people have, basically, to become a bit more concrete, the entire education system in many developing countries is geared towards the very few children who are at the very top of the class and will be able to graduate high school and go to college. And there is very little interest that is paid to anybody else in the class, people who would greatly benefit from learning to read and learning to count, but no one pays any attention to them. And the system is targeted to the top of the class, and the parents themselves also have this idea that the goal of education is this winner-take-all situation, where if you can be the top of the class, then that's great, otherwise there is really no point. Why do parents believe that? In part, they have the wrong beliefs about what the benefits of education are. And unfortunately, that's self-perpetuating, because if everybody is persuaded that there is no reason to invest anything in the kids who are not the absolute brightest in the class, then the kids who are not the absolute brightest in the class get nothing. And therefore, indeed, they don't benefit from school. So it perpetuates.
Abhijit, I wonder if you could just, maybe at this point, tell us what kind of students are we talking about here? Describe them, the kinds of lives they lead, the kind of poverty they live in. I think we need a greater understanding of that before we go forward.
I think, what's striking about that's probably true of, certainly true of the poorest, but of a lot of kids. Most schools seem to be run, even private schools, which are not the most, maybe not the most elite private schools, but a lot of private schools, so not necessarily the absolutely poorest parents. There's still a lot of kids who need a lot of hand-holding to get through the first years of education. And that's true in the US as well, that they need a lot of hand-holding. Somehow the education systems which are less resourced have decided to economize on that piece of hand-holding, whereas our view is that that's the piece of the most crucial piece of the education system may well be the early years, when you encourage children, you make sure that their self-worth is not destroyed. They're not feeling that education isn't for them. I think I think most education systems make the error, but that's a strong word, of sort of believing that kids come prepared. Either they are smart kids and they are ready for school, or they are not so smart kids and it's hopeless. And it's true. It's certainly that's biased, obviously, against the kids who come from, parents who are semi-literate or illiterate. They tend to have less confidence. They have less people telling them at home that if you don't understand, this is what you're supposed to understand. They have less people, the parents have less confidence that they can, basically go up to school and complain that, the teacher's not doing his job. So it's obviously the people it hurts most are the weakest people in society, but it's a surprisingly widely spread phenomenon. And the damage it does is really quite widespread.
Well, Esther, I gather you found parents who tended to regard the education system as more of a lottery ticket as opposed to a significant investment in their children's future. If that's the case, how does that affect the success that schools in developing countries can have?
Well, it's a lottery ticket and an investment, but it's worth it for the parents only if the kids can do very well. So what we are seeing as a result is some parents who very early on make a decision about which of their kids is the bright one. So one thing that is quite striking that you see in developing countries, and you see a bit less here, is people being quite willing to tell you, well, this kid is the bright one and this kid is not so bright one. Incidentally, the bright one might well be a girl. This is not necessarily gender specific. So the one who is the bright one will be sent to private school and will be given tutoring and will be helped out. And the not so bright one, who might be just as bright but perhaps less articulate when he was 6 or something, is going to not be helped. So that provides the kind of loss that Abhijit was talking about, where students very early internalize that, oh, the school is not for me, I'm not good at school. They kind of while away the time as long as they have to go to school, and they drop out when they have a chance. And that's where the huge waste of talent is.
Let's move to healthcare for a second, Abhijit. And one of the surprising findings I gather that you found and put into your book is that the health of the poor, they don't spend money on inexpensive preventative care like bed nets and immunization, but instead prefer to spend much larger sums on doctors and cures. Now, you've looked into this. Why do they make those decisions?
Well, I mean, one thing that's very clear is that, the curative services look like they're working, and you can sort of see the results, or at least think you see the results very quickly. I mean, you may when you take a pill, you get better. Typically, you also would get it without the pill often, but nevertheless, it looks like you're getting better. Preventive stuff is, you don't see, you see it only in the breach, right? If you don't do it, maybe you get malaria with probability 50%. If you do it, you get it with probability 35%. Now, is that 15% worth it? Almost surely. But is it the case that, a parent who's not, extremely sophisticated in calculating probabilities, can he figure out the difference from observing the 3 children in his neighborhood or his own 4 children or something? It's very difficult to figure out. So that's why, in some sense, I don't think most successful health systems don't rely on, patients' judgment on making sure that they get immunized or protected from malaria or stuff like that. These come from top down, and that makes perfect sense, because I don't think we can make these judgments. It's too hard. I mean, just how can I figure out whether this particular 1 out of 5 immunizations is going to really help my child? I see that he's still getting sick. I don't know whether he's getting the disease that immunization prevented, but maybe he's still getting some other diseases. I have to know the names of every disease, track them to the immunization, figure out if he really got the one that he was immunized against. All that stuff is difficult. And so, I mean, I see it's perfectly logical that they would see, where the mapping from the, what you do to the outcome is very straightforward. They see that, well, I took the pill, I got better. That's cool. It doesn't really help that, the preventive stuff has action at a distance, in a sense.
All right, we've talked healthcare, we've talked education. I want to now talk about food. And Esther, again, as we try to understand how decisions are made, you might expect that every extra cent that some of these poor families get their hands on would go towards food. But in fact, you tell us they have other things that they would rather spend on, like cell phones or televisions or funerals or festivals or whatever. Again, why do they make those decisions?
Well, you might expect that in the situation where people would be starving. And in fact, that's often, I think, our own prejudice, our own view is that a poor person is someone who is starving. And the truth is that there is a big difference between hunger and nutrition. And for a lot of the poor people in the world today, I'm not saying all of them. If you go to the Horn of Africa today, there is a real famine. People are hungry. So I don't want to deny that. But if we're thinking about poor people in India in normal circumstances, or in the rest of Kenya that's not affected, poor people are not hungry, they are malnourished. And that's a big difference, because if you don't feel hungry, then when you get some little extra money, what are you going to do? Well, I give you 10% more income, 6% of that you're going to spend on food, but out of this 6%, you're going to use about half to eat better tasting food, like more sugar and more fat, for example, and the other half only to get more calories and more nutrients.
Okay,
that means that...
Forgive me, we gave Esther the first word, and we're going to give Abhijit the last word because we're down to our last minute here. And I just want to finish up on this. By last year, your research lab had completed 240 experiments in 40 countries around the world. Give us one example of an intervention that you chronicled that worked.
So we, just along the health questions we were talking about, where there's an intervention in India where people were offered a token gift, a kilo of lentils, if they got their children immunized. That raised the immunization rates, more than double the immunization rates when you give people a kilo of lentils. That's a sort of a, I mean, especially immunization, there's full immunization rates, that's quite difficult to achieve, and somehow just 1 kilo of lentils gets you a very long way on that.
Thank you for that example, and thank you for doing this interview to Esther Duflo and Abhijit Banerjee, authors of Poor Economics. And congratulations again on your 2011 Financial Times Goldman Sachs Business Book of the Year Award. All the best.
Thank you.
Thank you.